Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art and Talk. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for watching our artist videos. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Art and Talk. As you know, Art and Talk is all about meeting artists and being inspired. So, with Christmas right around the corner, in just a few weeks, Art and Talk will be presenting a few artists to introduce you to who have been influenced by Jesus in their life and in their art. And we'll be taking a look at their art and looking at the direct relationship with Jesus through their art. So, again, thank you so much for being with us. And our guest today is a writer and he's an author, and he's published in multiple genres, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Today, we'll be taking a look at his book called I Am Not the King, that moves from darkness into light and is a testimony. So let's go ahead and find out about our guest's book. And I'd like to welcome our guest for today, Alan Taylor. Hi, Alan. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Leslie Sue.
Awesome. All right. So, Alan, where would you like to start about, kind of diving into like how this book came about, I Am Not the King? Where would you like to start in your journey?
Yeah, I can talk about several different aspects of my writing life and how it has transformed over the years. I grew up wanting to be a novelist. That was my first ambition in life from like the age of 10. And I grew up in a dysfunctional family. It was a religious family, but my dad was a rageaholic and verbally abusive, and I internalized a lot of things. So when I became an adult, entered adulthood, I was angry, confused, and bitter. And I went to college and discovered poetry and started writing poetry. I was influenced early on by the kind of the postmodern poets and the beats and several 20th century schools of free free verse writers. And so my poetry was not very, it was certainly not religious poetry. It was a lot of it was very angst ridden and sensual, and some would say grotesque. It was not what you would consider family oriented poetry. I delved into fiction, wrote and published fiction, but over the years, after coming to the Lord Jesus Christ, and that happened in college as well, my life has transformed, and along with that, my writing. And for the last 15 years, I've made my living as a business writer, and then I just felt the call one day to write my testimony, the story of how I left religion, left God, how angry I was as a young man, and then how God has transformed my life over the last 29 to 30 years. And that's where I Am Not the King comes in. That's the story that I wrote and published here recently.
Mhm. That's a beautiful beginning of having us understand kind of where you're coming from and kind of the environment that you grew up in and kind of moving into your adulthood. Can you tap into, Alan, the turning point when you accepted Jesus Christ into your life and he became, a strong presence in your life? Was that, you mentioned college, what, can you describe that kind of turning point and how that all came about before we dive into some of your excerpts in your book?
Yeah, that's a great question. While I was in college, I made some bad decisions financially, and some folks that I was hanging out with, and ultimately, what happened was going into my final year of college, I had joined the Army, earned some educational benefits, and those had run out. And so I was really trying to struggle with earning a living and going, and completing my college degree. That on top of, my emotional, stress, the anger I was carrying and the load that I was carrying, kind of made me have a breakdown. But the catalyst was, I remember sitting in a philosophy class, and the college professor started mocking Christianity, and I didn't really understand why. He was talking about different philosophical systems, and began mocking Christianity, and I just kind of thought about that after a while, scratching my head on why he would do that. I thought it was unprofessional, even though I wasn't a Christian at the time. And if you'd asked, I'd have probably said I was agnostic or whatever. I was trying not to think about those things. But under the pressure of some bad financial decisions, and I had to take an incomplete in that class so I could go and find a job and kind of get some things order in my life. And in the process of that, I found myself alone one day, and things just weren't going right for me, and I was stressed out. And I just called out to God, said, Lord, or God, if you're real, show me a sign. And that fast, he did. And it was an overwhelming, just immediate change in my demeanor, my spirit. And I just found myself spontaneously praising God right there. And it was sort of against my will, but I enjoyed it. And it was peaceful to me. And I felt that peace in my spirit. And I write about that scene in my book, and describe how that just kind of changed my life. And after that, I started dwelling on that and thinking on that. Well, what happened to me, and why did that happen to me? And started reading the Bible and trying to get a clear picture of this strange event that had occurred to me and what it meant. And from that day on, my life's really been kind of a journey, a spiritual journey.
Mhm. Ah, that's so beautiful. So when you said, God, are you real? And you were like questioning things, all these things that you had experienced growing up, and then as we were saying, like early adulthood, and then the financial situation. So you really were going through a lot. So you had an immediate response. Can you describe that a little bit more? So that we get a little bit more of a handle on it? Was it more like internal feelings? It was just like a wash of peace. Can you just tap into that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to describe. Yeah, it involved some external behavior changes. I found myself lying on my back, and I was clapping my hands, raising my hands in the air, and just praising God. Tears streaming down my face, some speaking in tongues, glossolalia, which was a strange experience. And I just internally, I'm thinking in my mind, why am I acting this way? Why am I doing this? I don't understand what's going on with me, what has come over me. And it lasted probably 10, 15 minutes. It wasn't long, maybe 5 or 10. I don't remember that much detail, but I remember having an internal peace about it. And just right away, the anger I was carrying, the stress I was carrying subsided. And I just felt an inner peace about my life. And then when I emerged from that, I don't remember what I did right away, but from that point on, before, I had spent most of my time alone writing. That was my life. I wanted to be a writer. And I'd spend hours a day just writing or reading or alone. I was not a people person, an outgoing person. I didn't like being, I wouldn't say antisocial, but I was asocial. Just wasn't a social person. So, but what I did after that was instead of writing, I would spend my time reading the Bible and really trying to get a grasp on who this God is, why this occurred, why this happened to me. I was really trying to understand my life and life in general. What's up with this God thing and how does it work? And I discovered that, in my reading of, the Old and New Testament, I discovered that I really had a faith in Jesus Christ that I had been suppressing, either consciously or unconsciously. And the Lord let me know that he was real and I needed to live as if it was. So I started changing my modes and operations and the way that I did things and the people that I hung around. Eventually I became much more social.
Thank you so much, Alan, for sharing that. Sounds like a really powerful, transformative moment that then you were guided and led into all these other areas of exploration and decisions and behaviors, as you're saying.
Yeah, it totally changed my mindset. And it wasn't necessarily a total mindset change right away. I still had some ingrained behaviors that I gravitated toward at certain times. But over time, I started noticing that certain things that were important to me, certain behaviors, certain attitudes, certain things that were critically important to my being before that moment would fall away and be replaced by were more conducive to a healthy being and healthy relationship with others.
Mhm. Alan, let's go ahead and look at your book cover and kind of dive into your book. Give me just a moment and we'll pull that up. Okay, so I Am Not the King. You want to give us a little bit more taste into that and then we'll kind of dive into some readings?
Yeah, so what I've done is I've divided the book into 3 parts. And so the first part talks about my childhood. And it kind of goes into some pivotal events or pivotal moments of my childhood, particularly as they kind of relate to spirituality. And so, for instance, early on in my life, I was probably 6 years old, maybe. I was invited to a vacation Bible school by some friends, and my parents let me go, my sister and I. And when we returned from that, we got off, the church bus, and it was a week-long event, I believe. On the last day, my wife, dad, or my mom and dad met us at the door and asked, well, how was it? Did you have fun? Yeah, we had a great time. Yada, yada. And then they said something very strange to me or to us, my sister and I, and said, well, great, because next week you're going to church with us. And we had never gone to church before. So that was rather strange. But from that moment on, I remember we started going to a church. And so that was a pivotal moment. And there were several others throughout the years, not all of them positive. Some of them quite dark, that just had an impact on me psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I'll write about those lyrically, in a narrative fashion, and in a way that is more artful. Some folks say I don't go into enough detail about my inner feelings in some of these situations, but my goal was not necessarily, it wasn't to tell a memoir, in which case I would probably go into more detail about my inner thoughts and feelings. But the idea is really to tell how God transformed me behaviorally and with my attitude and just my life in general. And so I tend to focus more on the outward things more than the inward things. But there's some, I think, some beautiful anecdotes in the story, and some descriptive moments. And so the second part, so the first part's about my childhood. The second part is about my young adulthood, my angry years before coming to Christ. And then the third part talks about the transforming part, the last 28, 29 years, how God has moved me from that angry young man to being a grandfather with no biological children of his own, a leader in church, small group leader, Sunday school teacher, and pivotal events in my adulthood that have affected me in the positive. But there may be still some dark moments here and there. And so you see, I hope the reader sees a gradual transformation over the course of the next 30 years of my life. So that's the point of the book overall.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we have a good kind of layout of the presentation that you bring the reader through. Let's go ahead and dive into one of the readings.
Sure thing. I'll put on my old man glasses here. All right. So this is from, I'll read this piece. It's a little bit long, but it's not maybe 800 words. This is from the first part of the book, and I start off in the introduction or a prologue before the first part about my childhood. So I kind of jump in media res. College classrooms are sterile places. Students by the hundreds occupy row seats as if catching the premiere of the latest Star Wars movie or eagerly sleeping through another chick flick just to listen to some tweed-suited lecturer drone on about formulas, statistics, and office party trivia. In philosophy, the trivia is really trivial. One sunny spring day, I sat in such a class at the University of Texas at Dallas. It was in the spring of 1992. I was in my third year of school, and life wasn't going so well. While discussing how philosophical systems compete against each other and sometimes collide, the professor veered into a riff on Robert Tilton. "Come on," he said, "how many of you have sent Tilton money?" Robert Tilton was a prominent televangelist of the 1990s. In fact, his program called Success in Life was headquartered in Dallas and was the fastest growing television ministry in the US in 1991. One of the chief proponents of prosperity gospel, he'd often interrupt his own legal tendered sermons and calls for financial gifts. People who mailed a check were sent a prayer handkerchief in return, just to speak in tongues. I was not a Tilton fan, but there was something unmoving about the professor's ridicule of Tilton and other televangelists. It spilled over to Christianity in general. The specifics of this professor's lectures lost on me today. The class was an introduction to philosophy, and on this particular day, he was discussing contemporary philosophies of the early 1990s, mostly political. He compared Christianity to feminism on the issue of pornography, pointing out that both were against it, but for different reasons. Christians oppose it on the basis of an outdated morality, while feminists oppose it because it objectifies the female body, he opined. And then he harangued Tilton. I was confused. Wasn't this a philosophy class? What did bad religion have to do with it? Shouldn't he have been promoting the excellencies of Kant, Hegel, and men with unpronounceable names? All around me, theater-style seats were populated by yuppies in training. Male and female, their religious proclivities hid beneath the veneer of their casual but conservative vestments. I didn't know these people personally, nor did I want to. At that time in my life, getting to know others was not a priority. I preferred the solace of loneliness. No one spoke up. The law of averages says at least half of the students were Christian. We were in the Bible Belt, after all. If anything, a good number of them attended some type of church most Sundays. But no one said a word except one skinny blonde with long legs sporting short shorts. She sat on the opposite side of the classroom. How can people believe that? She shouted. How can anyone believe all that nonsense about God? Silence. The professor let the question sit. Then, after a dull measure of quietude, he continued, anyone want to answer? A billow rose up inside of me. I felt a strange urge to respond. I wanted to yell out to the far reaches of the auditorium ceiling, because they're intelligent, but I quenched it. If you'd have asked, I'd have claimed to be agnostic. I might have given voice to atheism, if pressed hard enough, or I might have just said, who cares? It's hard to say because I tried not to think about such things. Most of my hours were frittered away, ignoring that still small voice deep within. In the caverns of my soul, there lay a seething volcano of hot ash, raw emotion, pure anger, and resentment, buried beneath the magma of my thought life. All it needed was one small tectonic shift to encourage it to the surface.
First of all, I just wanted to say, Alan, I really like your writing style. It's very clear, it's very succinct, and you move us, through the scenario. Like we feel like we're right there with you. It's the description and how you're like laying out all the characters in the scene is very well done.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, that's what I tried to do. So thank you for that confirmation.
All right. So what do you want the reader to get from this? What did you get from this college philosophy experience? You very well, as we just said, describe what was going on. This seemed to be like a catalyst stirring up some things within you. So why did you choose this to read for us, and what and what did this situation bring out? And as you're saying, like, pivotal things, and what do you want us to get from this scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, because it is a testimony of my faith in Christ, some people might call it a spiritual memoir, but I think that's too broad a term. I thought I wanted to focus, open up the story on that pivotal moment that transformed me, that transformational time in my life, the period where I moved from being anti-God or no God, not caring about such things, to really starting to care about those things. And that small moment, it really seems insignificant, sitting in this philosophy class, was a small catalyst to that event. The main event would come later. The event that I described earlier about calling out to God, that wouldn't happen for a couple of more months. But this period, this moment, is sort of that small, subtle call of God that says, I'm here. I just didn't hear it at the time. And so I'm sitting there, hearing him talk about Christians and and mocking them, really openly mocking them, and wondering why. And that's really the point of the scene.
Mhm. Yeah, and so it sounds like this was like planting like a seed within you, and that was going to germinate, come to fruition eventually. And that, as you said, like that small still voice, something about this experience in the college philosophy class with everything that was being said really seemed to kind of, your like inner voice kind of said, hi, I'm here. That's a lot of kind of like what I'm getting.
Yeah, yeah. I think, God, I've learned over the years that God really sends us messages sometimes in subtle ways and in ways that we don't understand or expect. And I've experienced that over the years. And when I look back on certain moments, I realize, yeah, that was God talking to me, or that was God moving me away from something or towards something by using the events in my life. And I think this was one of those events, because I was so intellectual. I was so into my head all the time. Um, that's how God reached me. He had to reach me through that vehicle of, the synaptic sparks going on. And philosophy was one of those things that I was into. I took the class because I was interested in philosophy. I'm not sure that it was a requirement, but I was interested in that, and I read philosophy on the side. I delved into that, different philosophies, New Age philosophies, esotericism, and various things. And so that was really something that I was into. And so for God to reach me through that vehicle, uh, just says a lot, I think, about how he works in our lives. And so I wanted to start with that because it really was kind of the beginning of my transformation, I think.
Yeah, it was beautifully stated. Let's go ahead, Alan. Let's dive into another reading from your book, I Am Not the King.
Awesome. All right. This is from the first section. In the book of Revelation, a description of New Jerusalem indicates its streets are made of pure gold, so pure that they are transparent, like glass. It's a divine allusion to the prophetic city mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. The streets of Waco, Texas are a far cry from the streets of New Jerusalem, but I walked them. My earliest recollections of childhood are in Waco. For the most part, they were happy days. It's where I cut my teeth on Dr. Seuss, where I learned to ride a bike without training wheels, and where I learned to end an argument with a hug. I would learn other things in Waco too. Mom taught me the alphabet long before I entered school. In kindergarten, I breezed through the flashcards from A to Z while others struggled. On the first day of class, the teacher had us introduce ourselves by our first names, followed by an animal whose name starts the same letter. I introduced myself as Alan Aardvark, and the class burst into uproarious laughter. I wasn't trying to be funny. A year later, in first grade, Mom walked me to school on the first day. How proud I was strolling along with the most beautiful woman in the world at my side. Our neighborhood was fairly safe, as I recall, maybe even idyllic. A normal middle-class small-town suburb. Mom pointed out landmarks along the way for me to remember my path by. She also encouraged me to look both ways before crossing streets, and to stop and wait when crosswalk signs indicated it wasn't safe to walk. The next day, and every day afterward, I was on my own, my first taste of independence. Short one.
Yeah. So that's like the first of the first, a monumental moment. I think that everyone, can remember that first day of school, and all that you just described and that you experienced. Again, beautifully stated. So, what do you want the reader to get from that? What was your thought process in presenting that, as part of the story of how you grew up and this specific moment in your time?
Yeah, great question. So the book has several dark moments in it, quite a few of those. Uh, but I wanted to show that there are also some light moments, and this particular scene, it's rather mundane. It's child's first day of school, walking to school. Uh, but we're talking about in the early 70s, and it was rarely safe in those days for a young boy to to walk to school in a small town like Waco, Texas. So, you know, I was the first child of my parents and the only son. So, you know, mom was really sort of, I think in this scene, in this moment of my life, she's a housewife, but she wants me to be independent. So she's sort of training me with that in mind. And so she was very good early on teaching me to read. You know, I learned to read actually before really going to school. So I knew the alphabet before any of my friends knew the alphabet. I could read a book before any of my friends could read a book. Uh, and I was walking to school while they were riding buses. And so, and it's really been the story of my life. I've been an independent person pretty much my whole life, and I didn't get married until I was 37. And so it's sort of the storyline. And so in my young adult days later, you'll see that streak of independence throughout my story. But when you get to the end of the book, in the third part of it, that independence kind of slowly fades away as I get married. You know, the woman I marry has children. I end up raising three of my grandchildren, and so that independence slowly gets chipped away. But you know, I still have that streak in me today. But I'm much more of a social person than I've ever been, and that's because of the transforming, um, the transforming nature that God has had in my life. And so I wanted readers to see that the book's not all dark. There are some dark moments, but it starts off light, starts off mundane, and then things start going awry a little bit later into the story.
Mhm. Yeah, you plant the storyline, really, really well, and you see the plants, the seeds of with your mom and helping you learn to read in the first day, and kind of like presenting that dominant kind of quality in your personality of independence, and how that starts to play out later and later. And then, as you were saying, through being transformed through faith and all that you experienced through Christ, then that whole type of independence becomes something completely different, and like dissipates and sort of morphs into something else, being more sociable, getting married, having a family life and children. So as you give us this beautiful sweep of what you experienced. Let's go ahead and dive into another aspect of your book, and then we'll continue our discussion.
All right. All right, let's tackle this one right here. It wouldn't be untrue to say I was naive. Mom's sheltering, the small circle of off-brand Pentecostalism, and Dad's bullying didn't provide very effective life success lessons. No one had taught me how to avoid a potentially bad situation, and I had no discernment. I once took a couple of weeks' leave and hopped a military flight from McCord Air Base. Such rides are free for active duty military, but the wait can be a few days. I made it to Oklahoma and bought a ticket from Lawton to Dallas, where my parents would pick me up. As it turned out, my bus was scheduled to leave early the next morning, so I was stuck in Lawton overnight. A local man entered the station and offered to sell me some pot. I hadn't had a joint since high school, so I thought, why not? Follow me, he said, and walked outside. I thought we were going to his car. Instead, he led me down the street into a residential area. There were no streetlights, so it was dark. I started to get concerned. Dressed in my Class A military dress uniform, I stuck out like a Green Beret. The Class A uniform was a requirement for catching a military flight, and I hadn't planned on changing clothes until I got to Dallas. Just when I thought I'd ditched this guy, Something flashed behind us. I turned to see a civilian vehicle with a flashing cherry on top. An older gentleman jumped out of the car and joined us on the sidewalk. He introduced himself as a reserve military police sergeant and showed me his identification. He explained that he drives the streets looking for military servicemen who might need his assistance. There was a military base nearby, so that sounded plausible. Where are you going? He asked me. I'm on my way to see my parents in Dallas, I said. Who's this guy? I don't know. We just met. Did he offer you drugs? Well, how did he know that? I thought. Yeah. You shouldn't be out here by yourself, he said. These local guys like to pick up young soldiers and promise them an easy high, then jump them and steal their money. I've seen it happen to a lot of unsuspecting young servicemen. I looked at the long-haired civilian guy on the sidewalk, waiting patiently for my return, and then back at the off-duty MP. I figured my chances were better with the MP. Why don't you come with me, he said. You don't want that. I bid farewell to the long-haired guy, climbed into the passenger side of the vehicle. The sergeant drove back to the bus station and parked. He backed into a parking space so we could see the bus station from where we sat. Want a beer, he asked. Sure. What else did I have to do? We sat in the bus station parking lot for about an hour, talking and drinking. Then the older sergeant invited me to his house for the night. My bus wouldn't leave for another 12 hours. I still wasn't sure I wanted to accept the offer. You know I'm not going to take no for an answer, right? He chuckled. He'd been a nice guy so far. Okay, I said. I should get some sleep. He drove a few blocks up the road, parked at a curb, and we went inside a single-family residence. We walked through the front door, and he whispered, my mother is sleeping. He led me to a bedroom at the end of the dimly lit hallway, past a closed door on the way. Once inside the bedroom, he closed the door. My mom is in that room sleeping. He pointed to the closed door. She's got health issues, so I look after her. And after a short pause, he added, this will be your room. Naive, no clue about how the world operates, and my guard let down after a couple of beers, I shrugged, undressed in my underwear, and crawled into bed. I thought the sergeant might leave and go to another room. He didn't. He undressed and crawled into bed next to me. It felt weird, and I don't know why I went with it. Lying in the dark, a stranger next to me, I wondered what I was doing. When I got to college, I empathized with feminist arguments that said, when a woman says no mid-coitus and the man continues, it's technically rape. So there's a dark moment, and so there are a few of those in the book, and I filter in some light moments to go with them, and of course it ends on a lighter note, with the present day, but you can see that the story is not all rosy, and so I want the reader to see in this that sometimes we don't really know why we're doing things, and at that point in my life, this was before college. This is probably a couple of years after leaving home. I was in the military. I was naive, first time out on my own. I trusted somebody that I shouldn't have. And so um, my early adulthood life was kind of filled with these little small moments of just kind of going with the flow. And sometimes going with the flow is not the right way to go. So that moment had an impact on me. It further fueled my anger, I think. And so the next few years, it would have a big impact on me, keeping me further isolated from others and keeping me on the track of anger and self-isolation. And so that's why I included that.
I appreciate your upfrontness and sharing, this a balance of what you experience and being authentic about it, presenting things that have to do with the light, and then also some dark moments, and that, we've all experienced each in our own way, and moving through that. I'm wondering, Alan, looking at the transformation that you have experienced and writing this book, what is your view of Jesus, a guide, a teacher, a mentor, and how does this play out with you on a day-to-day basis? And does this also play out in other art forms with you?
Oh yeah, that's a wonderful question. You know, my views are very Orthodox Christian. So the title of the book is "I Am Not the King," says in the subtext that Jesus is the King, and so he is Lord. He is my Savior. He is a guide, but he is the King of all creation, and so I follow the Orthodox Christian creeds and beliefs. That said, there is a personal nature. He's not just some king sitting on a throne over, seeing everything and ruling over everything. He is also a personal friend, a personal confidant, and I have a relationship, and so it's not always the best relationship, but that's my fault because I don't stay connected. I still have a tendency as a member of the human race to go my own way, want to do my own thing. But being filled with the Holy Spirit because of my faith in Jesus, I do get convicted. And when I catch myself not doing right, well then, I have to say, sorry, Lord, and help me to do better. But yes, he is definitely the king over, and I learned this, I titled the book, "I Am Not the King," because so much of my life before Christ, I lived as if I was the king. I tried to control everything. I tried to be in control of my life, my thoughts, my decisions. And we often think that we are in control, even when we're not. And what I learned was when I started reading theology, and I discovered that, in the book of Ephesians, it says we were dead in our trespasses, but now we are alive in Christ. So what I learned was, a lot of the decisions I made because I couldn't get past my sinfulness, and my sin was controlling me. But now that I'm alive in Christ, I have the ability to by his power, to control my sin. And so that's the lesson, I think, for all of us is, if we find ourselves doing things that we don't, that we're not proud of, and find ourselves doing things that we're ashamed of, or that we feel like we have no control over a situation, we can give that over to Jesus, and he does, and often does, help us get through those situations. And I've experienced that many times in the last 30 years.
Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful, Alan. Before we wrap things up, we still have a few more minutes, and we can touch upon writing because you have a lot of experience as a writer. If someone is watching this and they may want to get some pointers in terms of writing, or life is ongoing in terms of learning. Perhaps someone's watching this who is a seasoned writer. Is there any tips or advice that you would like to give on the area of writing?
Oh yeah, great question. I would repeat that old writing advice that you hear anytime someone asks that question, and that is write every day. Even if it's just for a short 5 minutes, if you want to keep a journal and write, or, if you just want to just describe a scene, sit down with a pad and a pencil, or or a pen, go to the park, just write what you see, but get in the practice of writing. And this is really how I learned to write in those early years that I talked about, when I was angry and self-isolated and I spent all my time writing. I would sit for hours and I would write and I would write and I would write. And I really think that's where I learned to write, because I would focus on writing a story or writing a poem, and I would get to the end of it and then I would type it up, and then I would go through and just pencil it, redline it all the way through, scratch out, rewrite, whatever. And it was a process, and then I'd have to go back and retype it again because in those days we didn't have personal computers. And it was a process, but that taught me to focus on the details. And to this day, I have a similar process. I focus on the details. I want to use active verbs. I want to use readable sentences. And so I want it to be easy to understand. And, so you focus on the fundamentals, and I think it all takes care of itself. But writing, like anything else, it takes practice. And so you want to be a great tennis player? Well, you got to practice. You're not going to be great just sitting around, eating Snickers and watching TV. So, so you have to practice. And I did that early on, uh, mostly because I was a loner, but that experience, being a loner and writing and writing and writing and spending my time doing that, that's what taught me to write. That and reading a lot. And you got to read a lot too, I think, to be a writer. Read as much as you write, but write every day.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great advice, Alan. I also wanted to mention that in your book, at the end of each chapter, I believe there are discussion questions. Do you want to just
Mhm.
tap into that? So, because I thought that was interesting that you include that in your book as well.
Yeah, yeah. I thought about doing that because I realized that a large part of my audience is other Christians. Okay, they read the stories. Some people like to read other people's testimonies because they find it encouraging, and that's great. But that doesn't help anybody but you. It may encourage you, and that's a wonderful thing. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book. But also, there are other people who may not read the book or may not want to read the book on their own, but might be interested in a discussion about spiritual things. And so I included the discussion questions at the end of each section, so the group leaders or anyone who wants to like start a book discussion group or whatever just could have sort of a place to start. And so you don't have to use those questions, but if you want to use it as a witnessing tool, say you're a Christian and you want to witness to someone who may have similar experiences or a similar background to mine, then those questions could be helpful. Or if you want to have a book discussion group, they're just a place to start. And so I include it for that reason. And I'm hoping that, small group leaders in churches or book group, book discussion groups, anyone that gets into that kind of community involved reading, might be interested in buying multiple copies for that purpose. And so it's done not to sell more books, but to kind of facilitate a discussion on really serious and important spiritual matters, which I think all of this is. And I just offer my life as a discussion open book for that purpose, so that if anyone really wants to take that endeavor on, then use my life to do that. I'm perfectly okay with that.
Alan, we're going to need to wrap the show up. We always like to leave the closing comments for our guests. So let us know how you would like to close the show out, anything that you would like to provide. And also let us know how we can stay in touch with you, and how we can also get a copy of your book, I Am Not the King.
Awesome. Yeah, you can go to my website, authorallantaylor.com, and right there on the home page is a little description of the book with a link to Amazon. So you can buy the book on Amazon. It's available in print and digital. And if you don't want to buy from Amazon, if you want to buy in another format, say EPUB, you can get the book at Apple, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, or any place where ebooks are sold. It's also available at Scribed and other places. But you should be able to also go to your local bookstore and say, I'm looking for this book by Alan Taylor, I Am Not the King. And they should be able to find it in the Ingram Spark database, which is what bookstores use to order books. And they should be able to order it that way as well. So anywhere books are sold.
All right, very good. And can you just touch upon what's on the horizon, or what are some of your current art projects going on, writing and whatnot?
Yeah, I have a book coming out in March from a traditional publisher on cryptocurrencies. I write about cryptocurrencies professionally because I'm a freelance writer. So I thought I'd write this book, and it's going to be published in March. It's called Crypto Social: How Cryptocurrencies Are Changing Social Media. I think this is going to be a really big deal, and so I wrote a book about it. I'm also working on another book that I will self-publish about cryptocurrencies. And then my follow-up to I Am Not the King will be a book on my participation in a church plant in the last 9 years. I spent 9 years at a church plant, helping a denomination plant a church. So I plan to write about that and publish that sometime in the next year.
Mm-hmm. Alan, thank you so much for being our guest today on Art and Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we wish you not only a Merry Christmas for you and your family, but also much success with your book, I Am Not the King, and also your current projects.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you again, Alan. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching Art and Talk. Again, we always appreciate the time you take to watch our artist videos and draw inspiration from them as well. Please stay connected with us on social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow and like us also on Facebook. All right, so we'll talk soon on the next Art and Talk. Until then, be well and be blessed.